Before we get into this video, I'd quickly like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this series and making all of this possible. If you're in need of a website, a domain, or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace. So the whole kind of idea to this episode is what happens once I get the images back from the lab. Where do I go then? How do I turn that into a physical product? So the idea I always had with this series is to make a book or zine. For me, books are the ultimate goal for anything that I do. Personally, I think it's the best way to ingest photography. The photos always look better in print, and the ability you have with sequencing to help tell the story, and the way you can evoke empathy and emotions. So I thought it'd be cool to give some tips and just the kind of general idea of how I did it myself, so that maybe you can have a go at it too. So let's get into it. So the first step that I took was actually, it sounds like a counterproductive one, but I actually think it's really helpful, and that's taking a break from the images. After receiving them back, I like to spend a week or two, preferably longer, away from the images and detaching yourself from them. Quite often you kind of become more favourable of the images that you had to work harder to capture. So if you kind of have this one portrait which you really worked hard to take, or this kind of one photo you really tried to nail, sometimes it's not the best photo, but you really like it because of how hard you worked. And if you spend that time away from them, it helps to distance away from those feelings and just allow you to judge them based upon the actual image. So after a week, I decided to give them a bit of post-processing, and this basically just means that I put them all into Adobe Lightroom and straighten the crops on all of them, and sometimes I tighten them up a bit more, just to get them the best way that I could see possible. I'm not a fan of wonky photos at all, and sometimes that does happen, so this is a small step, but I think it makes a big difference in the end polished kind of result. Even though the lab did scan the images to my preference, I made a few more final tweaks to get the images exactly how I wanted them, which pretty much was just making the images even flatter. I know a few people from the previous videos are a bit confused why this is something that I like, and it's been misinterpreted with overexposed, and actually the film isn't overexposed at all, it's just very flat and neutral, and this is just a personal preference of what I like. I don't think there's anything wrong with other ways. Just this is how I wanted the images to be, and the way that I took this to how I wanted it was pretty much just raising the shadows and taking down the highlights, and this just resulted in a really flat, neutral look, which I was really happy with. So the way I did this was making the adjustments to one image, and then turning it into a preset and adding it to everything. And then I made a few tweaks to each one because every image is not exactly the same, but I thought this was a good way of doing it. I thought this also may be a good time to talk about whether you should edit your film or not, and I think of course you should. A lot of people who say, oh, I shoot film for the kind of purist thing that you don't have to edit it. You don't have to, but anytime colour negative film is scanned, it's an interpretation of what it should look like. There isn't a right or wrong look for any of the films. There's always been changes to contrast and all these kind of things. Darkroom printing is what Photoshop is based off, so I think you should definitely be altering the images to how you want them to look. That isn't a bad thing. But at the same time, I'm not going to Photoshop in a crazy skateboard trick in the background of my images or anything. It's purely just for the colours and tones, really. So once I had everything the way I was happy with, I exported all of it into a new folder. And that's where I had my first kind of full browse through. Obviously I'd seen all the images before, but this is where I had my first kind of sit down and think about everything and the direction that I wanted to take it. And then I went straight back through and got rid of the 100% no-goes. At this point I hadn't got rid of any of them, so it was kind of the not in focus, just why did you take that kind of photos? And that left me with still a large pile of images. Since I wanted the series to be pretty heavily portraiture driven, I decided that would be the first thing that I kind of centered my attention around. So I went through and chose my favorite portraits, because pretty much every person I shot, I took at least 2 or 3 photos. So I then selected my favorite ones out of them and moved them into a new folder, which I think helped me to structure the other images around the most important ones. Since the series is all about the people, I thought this was the next logical step. So that gave me about 9 confirmed images. And I knew that that wasn't enough for the end product. I kind of wanted between 30 and 40, so I went back through and looked for my absolute favourite images, which I thought wrapped around to making sense of the portraits. So this was kind of just picking the absolute definites that I loved and isolating them all in their own folder, so I had this kind of new pool of images to work with. So I then went and opened up Adobe Indesign, which is kind of the best software to do all the layout stuff and get things ready for print. And I'm by no means a professional at this. I've learned everything myself. Don't look at me as a guru. And if you know the software and I'm doing something that looks really stupid, why not leave a comment and tell me? So the first thing you have to do is set up a document, and I pretty much just follow the guidelines that my printers offer me for this. So I'm using A5, which is the paper size, and I kind of use this because it's affordable and manageable. And then I have to add a 3mm bleed to the document, which is pretty basic, and it kind of just means an area around the page, which is kind of like the safety zone, because the pages get cut down after they're printed. But sometimes the press has a bit of leeway, so it kind of just ensures that you're still going to get a full image when it's cut down. So I also put in a rough page amount. I think it was something like 40. And something to note here is that printed publications always have page numbers that are divisible by 4. This is just the way that the presses work. The first thing that I started doing was knowing that the first kind of 8 pages definitely aren't going to have anything on, because that would be the kind of title and introduction, and then just started placing the images in an order that felt natural to me. I'm not sure if this is something that you can necessarily teach. It's kind of a try it and refine it, but I kind of went with things that I thought would pair together naturally. So things like strong pairing of colours, like the section of red images, or having a spread of images where the lines kind of lead nicely together. As far as placing the images actually down in the software goes, it's pretty simple, kind of just dragging and dropping. Anyone could do it, it's not very complicated. But one thing to note is that you kind of place these masks which the images sit in, so it can make moving things a bit frustrating, and you just have to remember that you have to double click on the image if you want to move the actual image and not the mask. The kind of quick way that I put all the images down is if you hold shift when you drag out the images, it creates a mask that will center the image in the page instead of just dragging and dropping the image, which saves you a bunch of time. So after I got all the images down in an order that I was pretty happy with, I exported it and sent it as a PDF to some of my friends for some critique. Thankfully, the feedback was pretty positive, so I just rejigged a few things and then exported it with the print settings. So this is probably a point where a lot of people will ask, where did you get it printed? I feel like where I got it printed isn't necessarily the right answer for you. I think the best way to kind of deal with the logistics of printing is to seek out the local businesses to you and ask for samples and quotes, and it's kind of the thing where you just have to do a bit of manual research, because it is quite a logistical thing, and it's a good thing to be able to be close and build a relationship with them and be able to go and oversee it if you want. So I definitely recommend just finding a local business and supporting the area around you. So you do have a few choices when it comes to the printers. You'll get to choose between paper stocks and bindings and all these kind of things. This also helps with the samples that you can get to know what you kind of like the feel of. So I know that I like quite thick paper, and I like silk pages and matte lamination. And this is just kind of, you learn from trying it out. This time I did go with a bit of an unusual choice, and I decided to try out a new binding method with this kind of wire bound thing, like a notebook. I just thought it would be interesting to try something new, and to pair with this I went with thicker paper than normal. It's 200 GSM on the inside, which hopefully will counteract the kind of floppiness of having a non-glued spine. And it should feel quite nice and premium, and the spine will allow it to open flat, which is a bonus. So we're now a few days in the future, and I actually have the zine in hand. However, the printers bound it on the wrong side, and it's on the top instead of the side. So half the images are upside down, which is a pretty big issue. So thankfully with a spiral bound publication, you can remove the images, so you would be able to stick them on your wall or something. So this means whilst I have to wait until Thursday for the amended order, I can still show the layout now, just a bit of a botch job. So after you get through the titles, you are entered into this establishing shot of the crowds, and then to this first portrait with the detail shot, which I thought just naturally pair well together and show the oddity of skating to the park with your dog. Then we got a pairing of oranges, which I thought went really nicely together. And then the first portrait, which I paired with white because I wanted to really emphasise the portraits, and that's what the whole book is about. And then we have a flow of red images, it's 4 images in a row, which I thought just ran really nicely together. And then we have more portraits and some nice pairings and leading lines. Some don't even necessarily have to have the direct colour comparison. There's no definitive rule, just sometimes you find some images that you think look nice together. And then as we get further in, we eventually get to our first full bleed image. The whole idea of this is that it makes it really big and fully engrosses you and makes you really feel like you're there, which is kind of the whole idea. And also, with a medium format camera, helps you really be able to pay attention to all the smaller details that you're able to capture. Then we have these two, which had matching kind of bright colours in their outfits, and these two similar peaks pointing the same way in their hats. And then we have this girl who is constantly on Snapchat kind of showing off and partying, paired with an empty bottle of Hennessy for obvious reasons. And then we have another full bleed of all the skateboarders helping to feel like you're there again. And then we turn into this white page of a girl by herself in the skate park, which feels really isolated. So putting this with the white, I felt emphasises that fact and kind of tells the story that she was one of the very few girls that we saw actually at the skate park and felt quite alone. And then we have the final two images, which is this guy and his dog, which I made a bit smaller to kind of counteract the fact that it was a bit blurry from a slow shutter speed, and the final full spread image, which I think just really was one of the best to be full spread with so much going on in one image. Which takes us back to the back cover, which is the wraparound image of the blurry skateboarder. So if you'd like to purchase a copy of the zine, I'd be very grateful, and you can find the link in the description to the Negative Feedback store. It really means a lot to everyone who helped support me being able to do this, and it's really awesome. I would also like to thank Squarespace again for sponsoring this series of videos. It's been an amazing trip, and we definitely wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So if you are in need of a website, a store or a domain, definitely check them out. They're definitely the go-to platform for building a nice portfolio for your photography or anything like that. So once again, thank you to them, thank you to Fuji for the film, thank you to Richard for helping us develop and scan, and I think that's it. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll be able to do something like this again soon. Please buy this, and goodbye.